born to Lionel and Joyce Dahmer. Named Jeffrey Lionel Dahmer, he was the first of two sons in a family that, at least outwardly, seemed ordinary. His father, a research chemist, worked diligently to provide for the family, while his mother, though described as high-strung and often ill, was present during Jeffrey's formative years. The Dahmer household was neither destitute nor affluent, and by all accounts, Jeffrey's early years unfolded without much fanfare. Jeffrey was said to be a bright and curious boy, fascinated by animals and the natural world. Teachers noted his keen intellect, and his parents often recounted moments when he displayed a sense of humor and a gentle nature. But as time went on, cracks began to form in the image of a picture-perfect childhood. When Jeffrey was just 6 years old, the family moved to Bath, Ohio. It was here, in the sprawling woods and isolation of suburban life, that his fascination with biology and anatomy would take on a new intensity. At school, Jeffrey was quiet and withdrawn, often sitting at the back of the class. His classmates described him as unremarkable, blending into the background without drawing much attention to himself. Yet, even as a young boy, he had peculiar habits. He would collect roadkill, dissecting the animals in a makeshift lab in the backyard. He claimed to be curious about how their bodies worked, a curiosity that would later gain chilling context. By the time Jeffrey reached his teenage years, the cracks in his family life became more pronounced. His parents' relationship deteriorated, marked by loud arguments and increasing tension. His mother's mental health struggles and his father's long work hours created a household defined more by absence than connection. In 1978, when Jeffrey was 18, his parents divorced and his father moved out, leaving him alone in the family home. It was during this period of solitude that Jeffrey's life took a turn, one that no one in his community could have predicted. Jeffrey Dahmer, by all appearances, was an average young man, polite, soft-spoken, and largely unnoticed by those around him. But his interests, his habits, and the loneliness of his life began to coalesce into a path that would shock the world. What followed would lead to one of the most chilling and incomprehensible crime sprees in modern history. The story moves to Bath Township, Ohio, a quiet, wooded suburb where the Dahmer family settled in the late 1960s. Their new home sat on a stretch of land surrounded by trees, offering a sense of seclusion. It was the kind of neighborhood where life moved at its own pace, and neighbors were more likely to hear bird song than the sound of passing cars. To an outsider, the Dahmer household seemed no different from the others on the street. Lionel Dahmer, a devoted father, spent much of his time at work or immersed in his studies. As a scientist, he brought a sense of precision and discipline to everything he did, though his growing career meant he was often absent from home. Joyce Dahmer, Jeffrey's mother, stayed at home, though her struggles with mental health became increasingly apparent. She was prone to sudden mood swings and intense periods of anxiety, often retreating to her room for days at a time. Tensions in the household grew quietly, but steadily. Jeffrey, now entering adolescence, spent much of his time outdoors. The woods behind their house became his private sanctuary, a place where he could wander undisturbed for hours. Animals fascinated him in ways that others couldn't quite understand. He would bring home roadkill, carefully dissecting the creatures to examine their internal structures. To Jeffrey, it was a way to explore the world around him. To others it was unsettling. His father, though perplexed, viewed these activities as an extension of scientific curiosity, even helping him learn proper preservation techniques. At Revere High School, Jeffrey was known to his classmates as a bit of an oddity. He blended in but stood apart. He became notorious for his ability to mimic others, particularly his teachers, earning laughs and attention from his peers. Yet, these moments of humor were fleeting. Most days he wandered the halls quietly, drinking from concealed bottles of liquor. Alcohol became his crutch, numbing feelings he rarely, if ever, expressed. Teachers noticed his distant behavior but largely dismissed it as typical teenage rebellion. Portal enters university and is introduced to many different people. The scene wouldn't be complete without understanding the environment around him. Bath Township was the kind of place where families knew one another, where doors were left unlocked, and where the most common disturbances came from teenagers pushing curfews. The sense of safety was almost unshakable. But within this tranquil setting, the cracks in Jeffrey's life were deepening. His parents' marriage, strained for years, began to unravel in earnest. Arguments filled the house, with his father often walking out to avoid conflict and his mother retreating further into herself. Jeffrey, caught in the middle, spent more and more time alone. His room became his haven, a space where he could shut out the chaos and immerse himself in his thoughts. While Jeffrey's isolation grew, his interactions with others revealed glimpses of the internal struggles he kept hidden. His peers often described him as distant, yet they occasionally saw a different side, one that was eager to connect, even if he didn't quite know how. But as the years went on, these moments of connection became increasingly rare. The victims in this story, too, had their own lives, each filled with hopes, dreams, and the complexities of daily existence. They came from different walks of life, each navigating their own challenges. Some were seeking new opportunities, others a fresh start. They had families who cared for them, friends who valued them, and futures that stretched out with possibility. The setting is now complete: a quiet community, a young man struggling to find his place, and lives destined to intersect in ways no one could have imagined. It was the summer of 1978, when Jeffrey Dahmer committed his first crime, a moment that marked the beginning of a series of events that would later be pieced together with chilling clarity. By this time, Jeffrey had graduated from Revere High School. The weeks following the ceremony were uneventful by most standards. His classmates moved on with plans for college or work, but Jeffrey remained at home, adrift and aimless. His parents were in the middle of a contentious divorce, and their arguments had escalated to the point of separation. Lionel had moved out, leaving Jeffrey alone in the family home with his mother and younger brother. But one day Joyce left unexpectedly, taking Jeffrey's brother with her. The house fell silent, with Jeffrey left entirely to his own devices. It was during this period of solitude that a chance encounter changed everything. The victim, Steven Hicks, was 18 years old. Described by friends as outgoing and kind-hearted, Hicks had recently graduated from high school himself and was planning to attend college in the fall. On June 18, 1978, Hicks was hitchhiking to a rock concert in Chippewa Lake Park. It was a warm, sunny day, and he was dressed casually, carrying little more than the excitement of youth and the promise of a good time. As Hicks walked along the roadside, Jeffrey drove past in his car, a blue 1973 Chevy. The two crossed paths near Bath Township, and Jeffrey stopped to offer Hicks a ride. Hicks, grateful for the gesture, climbed in. The drive began innocently enough, with the two engaging in small talk. Jeffrey suggested they stop by his house for a drink before continuing on their way. Hicks agreed. The details of what transpired after they arrived at the Dahmer home are reconstructed from Jeffrey's later confessions. Once inside, the two shared drinks, listened to music, and chatted. Hicks, friendly and unsuspecting, had no reason to feel uneasy, but as the evening wore on, Jeffrey became fixated on the idea of keeping Hicks from leaving. When Hicks eventually indicated it was time for him to go, something in Jeffrey shifted. He struck Hicks with a dumbbell, rendering him unconscious. Moments later, he strangled him to death. The crime didn't end there. In the hours that followed, Jeffrey, consumed by a mix of panic and compulsion, took steps to conceal what he had done. He dragged Hicks's lifeless body to the basement, where he began the process of dismemberment. Over the next few days, Jeffrey methodically disposed of the remains, crushing bones with a sledgehammer and scattering the fragments in the wooded area behind the house. There were no witnesses, no alarms raised. Hicks's disappearance was a mystery to his family and friends, who reported him missing when he failed to return home. In Bath Township, life continued uninterrupted, and the quiet community remained oblivious to the tragedy that had unfolded within its borders. Jeffrey's demeanor in the days and weeks following the crime gave no outward indication of the act he had committed. He went about his daily routine, maintaining an air of calm that belied the events of that summer evening. The lack of suspicion allowed the crime to go unnoticed, the only clues buried deep within the wooded expanse behind his home. Looking back, the absence of intervention is haunting. Hicks's decision to accept a ride from a stranger, Jeffrey's ability to carry out the crime without discovery, and the ease with which he returned to normalcy formed a chain of events that would only be understood in retrospect. Crime was not immediately linked to Jeffrey Dahmer, but it would later be recognized as the moment his path veered irreversibly into the darkness that defined the years to come. By the time the truth about Jeffrey Dahmer came to light, the story had already spanned over a decade, leaving an indelible mark on countless lives. For Steven Hicks's family, the confession offered clarity but little solace. Knowing the fate of their son and brother answered their deepest question, but could never fill the void his loss had created. Dahmer's admission, delivered with chilling composure, left no room for ambiguity. He described his actions with meticulous detail, recounting the decisions that led to the fateful day in June 1978. Investigators confirmed his account through physical evidence, officially closing the case that had haunted law enforcement for over a decade. The outcome of Steven Hicks's story stood in stark contrast to the broader narrative of Dahmer's crimes. While this case reached its conclusion, the revelations surrounding Dahmer's other victims painted a picture of systemic failures, missed opportunities, and unanswered questions. As the investigation into his crimes unfolded, the public struggled to comprehend how Dahmer had evaded detection for so long. Each detail of his life, his arrests for minor offenses, his unsettling behavior that went unreported, and the near misses by law enforcement, added to the growing unease. How could a single individual inflict so much harm without raising alarm? Reflection on the case of Steven Hicks offers a microcosm of this larger tragedy. Hicks, a young man with his future ahead of him, encountered Dahmer on an ordinary day, in an ordinary place. There were no warnings, no signs to suggest the danger he faced. His disappearance, though investigated, was hindered by the limitations of the time. Missing persons cases in the 1970s often lacked the resources and urgency applied today. For the families of Dahmer's other victims, Hicks's case served as a reminder that closure, though powerful, comes at a cost. Identifying remains, reconstructing timelines, and hearing confessions bring answers, but they also force families to confront the harrowing realities of what their loved ones endured. As the story reaches its conclusion, it's impossible to ignore the broader questions it raises. How many opportunities were missed to intervene? How many lives could have been saved if warning signs had been recognized earlier? And what changes in law enforcement, forensic science, and community awareness might prevent such tragedies in the future? Jeffrey Dahmer's crimes forced society to confront the complexities of human behavior, the fragility of trust, and the devastating consequences of isolation and neglect. In the case of Steven Hicks, the investigation uncovered the first step in a long and tragic series of events, but it also highlighted the importance of vigilance, compassion, and the pursuit of justice, even when hope seems lost. As we close this chapter, we turn to you, the viewer. What are your thoughts on this case? Are there lessons to be learned, or questions still unanswered? Let us know in the comments below. If this story has resonated with you, consider exploring resources on missing persons advocacy or mental health support. Together we can honor the memories of those lost by working toward a world where such tragedies become less and less frequent.